Hey everyone, and welcome back to this month's book recap. I am so glad you're back. Welcome. Of course, we're going to be talking about books. We're going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of July. I feel like there was a mix of some really great books, some books that kind of missed the mark for me, which I feel like is very normal with monthly reading, and it happens, but we're still going to talk about them, and let's just get right into it. The first book we're going to start off talking about is The Handmaid's Tale. Now, this is a book that has been on my list to read for a long time. I'm not somebody who read this book in school, so as an adult, I feel like I've just learned that you have to start reading banned books. You have to incorporate them into your yearly reading, and this one is actually recommended a lot by my cousin Nato. She loves this book and she talks about it with me all the time, and she's always surprised to learn that I've never read it before. So I picked it up and I read it. So if you don't know what The Handmaid's Tale is about, a little bit about it is that it's pretty much a dystopian novel, and it discusses the topics of feminism and society and what happens to society and culture when we take away women's rights and we suppress them. This book was so powerful. It was such an incredible book to read, especially in times like today, unfortunately, where a lot of the things that happen in this book are things that still happen and are seen today in today's society, which is very unfortunate and very sad. I actually ended up annotating this book, which was such a smart decision to do because I felt like there was so much to talk about, and Margaret Atwood's writing is revolutionary, honestly. Like, I was reading the words on the page and there were certain sentences in the book that I had to stop and digest what I just read. It was that incredible. It was that important. You could tell that when she was editing and in the writing process that she chose her words so carefully and so methodically, and every word, every sentence, every chapter felt important, and it felt really, really well chosen. Good writing is so important, and I feel like every time an author really sits there and chooses the words that they want to write and the sentences they want to create, it really does elevate the book, and I was really thoroughly impressed with this one. So this book was definitely a heavier topic book, so it did take me a little longer to read through, and it took me longer to really digest and want to sit there and understand what's going on, which I feel like is kind of normal with books like this. I wanted to take my time with it. As I was annotating and I was reflecting on how a lot of these things are still things that are talked about in today's society, there were times where I forgot that this book is not a contemporary book. This is a book that has been published, been out. It is an iconic piece of literature. And so that really shocked me, and it took me out of the book for so many times because I was like, oh my God, like, this is not a recently written book. And that was really scary, honestly. I honestly went into this book not knowing what to expect. I didn't really know where the plot was going to go. I didn't know how many characters we were going to read. I didn't know how in detail the society was going to be written. I had no idea. I was going into this kind of understanding very vaguely about what the book was about, and I was very thoroughly impressed. You're following this main character and she's just describing what has been going on, her thoughts, her feelings. You also get a lot of side character, which the side characters felt like such a great support for the main plot and also for our main character, and it just developed the plot so heavily, and it really added a lot of emotional depth, which I appreciated. There were so many times where there was this emotional internal conflict of, do I escape? Do I stay? Do I tolerate this kind of behavior? Do I try to be progressive? Do I try to do something about this? And it really tests the instincts of a human and their survival instincts. Honestly, just reading what the characters had to go through and the emotional, internal, external, so many different kinds of conflict in this being discussed and revealed, I was stressed out. I was having so much anxiety because it makes you think, like, what would you do in this situation? Would you accept this and just go with society and the new norm of society? Or would you try to escape? Would you try to do something about this? I love that this book also highlighted and emphasized the power of female friendship and female relationships and camaraderie. I love books that highlight this. I feel like it is such an underrated thing that's talked about or discussed, is the power of women and the power of us banding together and sticking up for ourselves, but also helping others around us and being there as people and as females. Now, this book also did highlight toxic femininity, where there were females in this that were bullies to one another and maybe didn't treat other women the right way, or even like there's hierarchies within women's roles in society, which was honestly a really crazy thing to delve into in this book, because you're just expecting it to be a book about men versus women, but it's actually diving deeper into the sometimes what happens with society is that even the women are segregated and the women are put in these different tiers where the handmaids are the lowest, and then you have the people who the handmaids work for and the servants. It was really an interesting way of portraying the positives of womanhood versus the negatives, because there definitely are both. Like, it's not always happy-go-lucky with every woman or every girl that you meet and you talk to and you meet in society, even today, which I thought was a really interesting and great way to kind of contrast the importance and the power of positive womanhood versus the negative. I also really appreciated the fact that Atwood chose to portray and talk about a time before the society had changed. I felt like that added a lot more detail and depth to the severity of the situation currently. We get little glimpses of the main character's time before, when she had her husband and she had her daughter, and then counteracting to the present where everything is in shambles. I think it really just added a lot of depth and importance to the story, which I really appreciated as well. Overall, I'm really glad I read this, of course. I recommend anyone and everyone to read this. I not only learned a lot about myself, but I feel like you learn a lot about the consequences of taking away human rights, and I felt very emotional about this book, and a lot of it reflected a lot about what's happening today. So I would highly recommend you read this. I think it's important to read any banned book, all banned books, because they're banned for a reason. They're that powerful and they're that important that you need to read them before they completely go away. I ended up giving this a 4-star. I would say I had a really great time with this, but obviously this is not a kind of book that I'm reading for entertainment necessarily or for a good time. It's more just, I need to read this, and this is a book that really changed my perspective about a lot of things. So yeah, Handmaid's Tale, 4 stars. Thank you, Nato, for constantly telling me to read this. I definitely needed to read this. So yeah. So after The Handmaid's Tale, this is kind of a crazy jump from going from a book like The Handmaid's Tale into this next book that I read, which was The Sweetest Oblivion. This is a dark romance, and it felt so wrong to do this, but it was the next book I ended up reading, and it's been on my want to read list for a while. So I was like, you know what? I kind of need to switch gears. Let's get back into the romance. So this is the one I ended up picking. Please don't judge me for my choices, guys. This just ended up happening like this. So let's talk about it. Unfortunately, I think this is one of those cases with this book where it wasn't a bad book. I have read so many dark romances at this point that I think a lot of things don't surprise me anymore, and a lot of the things end up being the same plot, the same character dynamic. So I felt like this kind of ended up being that kind of situation. So the main premise of this book is that it's a mafia romance, and we have Elena, the main character, and she also has a sister, a younger sister, that is kind of being put into an arranged marriage with this other mafia family. And the main male character, Nicholas, is supposed to be marrying the youngest daughter, but he ends up falling in love with Elena and being infatuated with her. So we get the situation where she is into her sister's arranged marriage husband from a different mafia family. So that's the vibe. I mean, this has every classic trope of like a mafia romance. We have the overprotective Nicholas over Elena. He will do anything for her. He will kill for her. He will ride or die for her. Definitely we have an enemies to lovers trope here. Definitely like a forbidden romance kind of vibe. Like, the writing style was just not for me. It felt very corny and very scripted. It almost felt like a script for a really bad movie or like a show about an Italian mafia situation. Like, that's what it kind of felt like at times. I was reading like a script for a really badly written TV show, which was definitely not the vibe that I was going for with this. This is definitely a book that felt less dark than other dark romances that I've read before. I felt like a lot of their spicier scenes in this book was very sweet and nice, instead of like the dark romance that I was expecting. So if you're going into this expecting like a really dark, hot and heavy kind of thing, this was actually a lot more tame and a lot more innocent than I'm used to. I think overall there was just a lot of dark romance elements that I was missing in this. I felt like, again, like he was really nice to her from the start. Their romance scenes or their spicy scenes were not as hot and heavy like I was expecting them to be. So I think a lot of that just kind of missed the mark for me, unfortunately. And of course, there was always the chance of a miscommunication trope, which in this case there was. And anytime there's miscommunication, it irks me. And yeah, it just frustrates me. So unfortunately, that is the case with this book. This is a book that is part of a series, but I don't think I will continue the series or pick up the next books. I'm in this phase now in my life where I don't feel forced to continue books in a series just because I want to give the rest of the books a chance. Like, I'm going into this now being a first impressions kind of girl. Like, if I read the first book and I'm not impressed, or I don't think there's potential here, or I'm not interested in the characters, I don't like the writing, whatever the case may be, I'm not going to force myself to continue a book series because it's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, and I'd rather pick something that has better potential. So yeah, I'm not going to pick up the rest of the books in the series. I've heard the rest of them are great. This is actually a book that is a staple in dark romance. Maybe it's just a TikTok thing. Maybe, I don't know. Which I was really surprised that this book made it into like one of those you have to read or you have to get to. I ended up giving this a 3-star. Again, was it a good time? Kinda. Would I recommend this? Probably not. But if you are just getting into dark romance and maybe you're not sure what direction to go into, or maybe you want something that's a little lighter, not so crazy, maybe pick this one up. So that was The Sweetest Oblivion. So this next book is a book that I have had on my anticipated reads for this year, and I was extremely excited when this book came out because I do love this author. So I picked up In Stormy Weather, and Chelsea Curto wrote one of my favorite sports romance series, which is the DC Star series, and I was extremely excited and looking forward to this next book of hers because it seemed very, very intriguing. So this book is talking about two characters named Quincy and Sebastian, and they both are weather people. So they both work in detecting weather and storms and tornadoes and all that, and they kind of are their arch nemesis rivals. They've always been competitive even when they were younger, and they're both like the smartest people in the room, and they compete with each other because of that. So that's also her friend's brother, and he's always had like a crush on her kind of thing. So that's the premise of the story. One of the things that I thought was well done in this book is the enemies to lovers vibe of this. I felt like it was well written and I felt like it was very believable. I think the idea that they were each other's competition and each other's rivals from when they were younger helped a lot in that. And it felt very well written and it felt very believable, and it didn't feel like they got over it really quickly, which I did like. And also with that, I felt like their chemistry was also well written and it came across well on the page because they had so much history from when they were younger. Some of my favorite moments of the book are the moments where they're working together to report a weather storm or a tornado or whatever it is. They're working together. I really like those moments, and also the little moments of when Sebastian is showing his good side to Quincy, because a lot of it is her just thinking he's a bad guy and he's cocky and he's thinks he knows it all and he's arrogant and he's mean to her. But the little moments where he protects her and cares about her and stands up for her are some of my favorite moments of the whole book. I hate to say this, unfortunately, but there was a lot of things in this that just didn't hit the mark for me. I think the number one thing is that I am not a person who's into weather or storms or knows anything about how that works or that world works. I'm not a person that's really into that. So some of this book really relies heavily on the weather information and all the facts you get with how people detect weather and chasing a storm and reporting it and all that. And it's not something I'm interested in. It's not something that I was particularly looking forward to in this book, was learning more about that kind of stuff. And there was just a lot of it. And I felt like a lot of that information, or the story in general, was a lot of telling and not showing, which I do not like a lot in books, is where the author is just telling me a lot of things instead of just showing me. So I think the writing just felt a little off for me in this book. So with a lot of the story relying heavily on all things to do with the weather, I felt like I couldn't relate as much to the story and to the characters. There were things that were relatable in a general sense in terms of like the character struggles and maybe like the things that they're going through with like their jobs, but I felt like it was kind of hard to relate specifically to the things that were going on in this book, which took me out of it. It made me feel more like a spectator instead of me feeling connected to the characters and as if I'm in this story with them. I wish we got more smaller moments between the characters, and I felt like a lot of it was just the major moments of where their dynamic changes. I wish we got more scenes with Quincy and Sebastian, and I wanted to see more of that slower little moments that really enhance their chemistry and also their relationship development. I felt like their chemistry was great, and the enemies to lovers kind of thing was well written, but I just wanted a little bit more progression. I wanted a little bit more smaller moments of them learning to trust each other, because I think that was a big thing, was that they didn't trust one another, especially Quincy trusting Sebastian. So I just think it progressed a little too quickly, and I wanted the smaller moments for sure. I think the story was fine. Like, it wasn't anything. I mean, the concept was different and new because, like, I don't think there's any books with characters that do this kind of occupation, but it didn't really surprise me. It wasn't something that was like, oh my God, like this is crazy. It was just kind of like a okay book. That's what it kind of felt like. And the amount of times he calls her Quincy baby in this, I couldn't. Like, I'm not a person that gets icked out by nicknames that much or pet names, but Quincy baby, the amount of times I had to read that, I was fed up with it. I was like, it was probably like 3 or 4 times on a page. Like, that's how much. And I was like, there are so many other ways to address someone besides Quincy baby. And it just irked me. I don't know. That really got me, unfortunately. I also didn't find the writing to be necessarily captivating in a way that I really cared about these characters or what happened to them. I felt like towards the end of the book, I was skimming a lot and I was just kind of flipping through to see what happens, but I really didn't care that much. I wasn't really emotionally invested in them. Not only was I not emotionally invested in them, it just kind of felt like it was really obvious what was going to happen. And it was one of those where the ending was just really predictable and it was going to be a happy ending and everything was going to work out. I don't think this is a book that I would recommend necessarily to people. I feel like it's a very niche audience, and this is not Chelsea Curtow's best writing, unfortunately, which you never want that to be the case because I did love DC Stars a lot. This book just didn't have that Chelsea Curtow spark that the other books that I've read from her did have. So it's just so heartbreaking to say. And I was just really looking forward to this and it just didn't click with me. If she does make this book into a series or like a interconnected, I was really invested in Cooper and Mia. Cooper is Sebastian's friend and Mia is his sister. And there was definitely some tension there because she is engaged. So they really caught my attention in this more than the main 2 characters did. So if she does make this an interconnected, she needs to do a book on Cooper and Mia. I was really kind of interested in their little story and I felt like that would develop so perfectly. So I'm just putting that out there. If there is a book that comes out about them, I will be reading it because that story was definitely more interesting to me than the Sebastian Quincy moment. So overall, I would highly recommend you read her other series, the DC Stars. It's a hockey romance series. Those books are really great. They are perfect, and the tropes and the dynamics that she writes in each of those are literally perfection. I would definitely pick that up. This book, I would not recommend picking up, unfortunately. I was debating giving this a 3-star, but it just felt more like a kind of book to me. So I ended up giving it a 2, which hurts my heart and it makes me really upset that I have to talk about it again and reminisce about my experience reading this. But I still love Chelsea Curtow. I love her and I will continue to read her books and support her. I feel like the DC Stars alone just put her on this pedestal for me. Yeah. It's okay though, because this kind of thing happens and you're not going to love every book an author comes out with. This one I didn't love. But again, I'd recommend her other books. Check them out. Those were really great. But yeah, that was In Stormy Weather. So this next book is continuing the genre of romance. I'm not sure if it's a dark romance or if it's considered a rom-com. I'm not quite sure. Don't quote me on it. But I picked up Tourist Season, which is on my 26 for 2026. So yeah, I didn't realize this book was the same author that wrote Butchered and Blackbird, which I haven't read that series. I haven't picked up any of those books, but let me know if I should read them. But I did not know that this was the same author. I had no idea that this was the situation. I actually found this out after I read the book. So let's get into it. So this is a story about Nolan and Harper is from a small town, and she has this secret background. You kind of learn about the morally gray parts of her and the decisions that she makes. And Nolan comes to her town and pretty much stalks her. So what ends up happening is that she is onto him and she figures out what he's planning to do, and he's trying to kill her pretty much. And then she ends up needing him for something that's happening. And so they end up banding together and working together to solve this murder and to solve this crime and to cover their tracks. And so you kind of just learn what the heck is going on in this story. My description of this is not doing it justice. I would definitely read what the blurb of this book is, but the plot is just there's so much going on with the plot, and there's so much like that's secret and hidden that I can't really talk about it. But that's kind of the general synopsis of what's going on. I didn't know what to expect going into this. I wasn't sure if this was going to be humorous, if this was going to be more of a jokey, haha kind of book, or if this was going to be more of like a serious murder kind of vibe thing. I knew it was romance, but I just didn't know what direction it was going to go in. I think the plot was interesting about how both the main characters are killers and murderers and how they end up needing each other and working together to figure out their situation. I thought that was kind of cool and interesting. One thing I did like about this was the back and forth between the main characters and kind of that push and pull between liking the person but not wanting to like the person, and kind of having this thing where they don't want to admit their feelings for each other. I feel like that was really nice and cool. And I felt like it helped slowly progress their relationship into like, oh, I think he's cute, but I don't want to think he's cute. Or I really like her and I think she's adorable, but I hate myself for liking her. I think that added a lot of comedy to the book as well. I feel like Nolan changed a lot from the beginning of the book into like even like the middle end of the book, especially once he started liking Harper. I felt like in the beginning he was portrayed as this very dangerous, mysterious, don't mess with me, I'm like a number one killer, I'm not to be messed with kind of guy. Like he felt very dangerous and he felt very like don't mess with him. But by the middle of the book, he just felt very sweet and nice, and I don't know. I didn't love the switch up so much. I wish he stayed more vengeful, and I wish he stayed more dangerous and mysterious. I felt like we got to know him really quickly in the book, and I just didn't love that character switch up, especially once he started liking her. Also, I felt like this is one of those books where he falls a little too quickly for her again. Like by the middle of the book, not even by the middle of the book, he meets her once and goes on a little date with her once, and then he likes her and he's falling for her, and oh, she's actually really cute, and oh, maybe she's not what she seems. I don't know. I didn't love that. I felt like he just liked her too quickly. So this next part is going to be a little bit of a spoiler. So if you don't want to know this and you want to read the book, I would skip some of this part. One thing that didn't make sense to me with the plot is that Harper knows that she didn't kill Nolan's brother. She knows this, and she knows that he assumes this about her, and that's why he's after her. So why didn't she just tell him? Like, I understand that, like, she has secrets she's protecting, but this was not something that needed to be protected necessarily. Like, this wasn't something that would jeopardize her safety. This would help her and maybe get him to understand that what her situation is. That was a little weird, because the whole thing is that she takes someone else's identity, so he thinks it's her, but it's not her. And I felt like a lot of this plot and a lot of this conflict could have been resolved really quickly if she just communicated that with him. So I felt like that just didn't make sense to me, and that fell flat to me in terms of the plot. A lot of things that were happening outside of the main plot between the two main characters. There was a lot of side characters. Like there was a journalist, there was a person who owned the hotel, there was the police, there was the sheriff, there was a lot of other external things going on besides the main plot, and I felt like a lot of it was just kind of boring and didn't really feel necessary. It felt like a lot of that was helping set up the next book, because I know there's another book that came out. I just wasn't really into the extra stuff, to be honest. And don't expect when you finish this book to get all the answers to everything, because this book ends, I wouldn't say on a cliffhanger, but it kind of ends very open-ended. There's a lot of things that we still don't know, and there's a lot of things that we don't have answers to. So again, it's just setting you up for the next book and wanting to continue to read and figure out what's going on. A lot of it is like deep lore within the town that she's in. So if you read this and you're into that, I would definitely go into this knowing that the ending is not going to make you feel satisfied. So overall, I think this was fine. Again, it was just a fine book to me. I don't think I'm going to read the next book or finish the series, because I just wasn't invested in the characters. I didn't really care that much. I felt like, again, towards the end of it, I was just kind of reading through it just to see what happens. But I'm, again, not forcing myself to finish books that I don't feel like are worth my time. I ended up giving this a 3-star, which is fine. Like, it was good. It was entertaining. I think there was a lot of moments that made me laugh, and there was a lot of things that were funny in this. I feel like that's kind of the vibe that she did with Butchered and Blackbird and that trilogy, where it's kind of more haha and not so serious. So if you do like those books, or if you like books that are rom-com-y, this might be a book for you. But unfortunately for me, it's not a book that I see myself continuing, which is fine. It's okay. Like I said, not every book is going to be my vibe, but I am glad I read this because it did mark off another book on my list, which is awesome. And this was a book I was interested to see if I was going to like. So yeah, that was Taurus season. Okay, guys, so the next book that I ended up reading, wow, I can't wait to get into this book. The next book I picked up was The Ascended, and this is also a book that has been on my want to reads list for a while, and the ratings on this alone on Goodreads convinced me to pick this up, and yeah, let's just get into it. So the premise of the book is that we have two main characters. We have Thaise and Thatcher, and they are twins, and they live in this small town with their adopted father, and Thaise has this power in her that she needs to suppress and she needs to hide because the government will come and find her. So one day these people come and invade her village, and they have intel that someone in this village has powers and that they haven't exposed themselves, and they need to volunteer to go to this like governmental game kind of thing and go through these trials. And so they think it's one of Thaise's friends from the village, but she ends up telling them like, it's me, I have to go. So Thaise is taken to go do these trials. Think of Hunger Games, where she goes there because she's trying to save someone else from going there, and she volunteers to go, and she gets a mentor, and she has a mentor that's guiding her through the games, and each mentor picks who they want to mentor. And so her mentor ends up being Zuul, and he's like one of the more powerful people, or the powerful mentors or gods or whatever they are. So he ends up picking her. And then what ends up happening is they also capture her brother Thatcher. So Thatcher is in the games as well, even though he doesn't have powers. So we kind of go through that. And then she goes through these trials kind of again with the Hunger Games-esque, but think of like Hunger Games if there was like supernatural elements and fantastical elements to it. And yeah, we just kind of go through that journey with them. So yeah, like I said before, this definitely gives Hunger Games. If you liked Hunger Games, but you like fantasy, this you will love. Again, with the volunteering, and she's going and having a mentor, but there's also people from the outside that are observing the trials and have votes about things. So it definitely gives that kind of vibe of dystopian kind of society. I really loved the writing choices and the writing style in this. Every word choice felt intentional. Everything felt very elevated and very intellectually written, but not confusing. I feel like sometimes writers will just stick in some buzzwords or like some fancy words here and there, and it doesn't connect with how the rest of the writing style is. But this flowed beautifully, and it just felt very sophisticatedly written, but it was never confusing, and I always understood what was going on. The plot is very entertaining. I literally couldn't stop reading this. I was just like going. There was so much that was going on, but it's very easy to understand, if that makes sense. I really loved the natural flow of dynamics in this book. I know that's a weird thing to say, or a weird thing to point out, but I felt like the dynamics and how they played out in the story just made sense, and they were relatable and real. And even like her relationship dynamic with her brother and the other people that she meets in the trials, and her relationship with Zuul, it just made sense, and they flowed naturally, and it felt realistic. Like, it felt like I was in there with them, and these are choices that I felt like these characters would make. I will say that it is implied that like Thaise and Zuul will have a relationship and kind of develop feelings for each other throughout the book, and I did feel like their relationship was a little rushed, just because we only got like 1 or 2 scenes of Zuul kind of being mean to her and not really liking her before he ultimately just falls for her and like starts liking her and being nice to her. So yeah. And I think it's also like he wants the best for her because that's his mentee. Like, mentee, is that a word? I don't even know. He needs to look after her and make sure that she survives this. He also has some things that he needs from her. yeah, it just was a little rushed for me. I feel like I wanted a little bit more of the hatefulness and the I don't like you kind of thing. I did like how the trials themselves were entertaining. I feel like a lot of times what happens in romantasy books like this is there's always a trial, there's always something that the characters have to do. And I feel like most of the times in these situations, I get really bored with the trials and like the extended plot of them fighting and them struggling and trying to figure out the maze or whatever it is. But in this, it felt really entertaining. And those scenes were honestly the most important because a lot of the trials and tribulations that they go through revealed a lot about the characters. So you learn about the characters and how they develop and how they deal with situations like this through their times doing the trial. So those are some of my favorite parts of the book because you learn a lot about the characters and also their dynamics with each other. Like a lot of the character development between Faze and Thatcher happens in those trials where they have to depend on each other and they have to work together and then they meet other people. So the trials were really entertaining, which I appreciated. I like how in this book we get some chapters from other people's point of views. So we get pretty much Faze the whole time, but some chapters end up being Thatcher's point of view. And then towards the end, I think it ends up being Zul's point of view. And I really like that because Thatcher does become an important part of the story. And it's nice to see what's happening when Faze is not there through someone else's point of view. I think that really develops the plot a lot and it makes you invested in the other characters. And it also makes you become connected emotionally with other characters, not just Faze, because you're not seeing them in her point of view, you're seeing them through Thatcher's point of view or Zul's point of view. So it does help character development. It does add some character depth and it helps you connect with other characters because you're not seeing them in one lens. So like I said, Thatcher becomes a very important part of the story and I like that he has importance. He's not just Faye's twin brother who makes everything difficult for her and now she has this moral thing where she has to always keep an eye out for him and she has to make sure he's okay. Like he becomes so important in the story on his own and he has his own story going on and it just adds so much to the universe and to what's going on. And even though Thatcher is important to the story and he plays a major role in what's going on, that doesn't overshadow Faye's story and what she's going through. The balance between the importance of both of them is so well written. You become invested in both of them and you understand each of their stories and what they're going through internally without sacrificing the other person's importance and their story. I think that's a really hard thing to do is when you have more than one character that's really important and the plot relies heavily on more than one character and you can balance both of their stories without sacrificing the other person. So I really did like that. I felt like that was a unique thing where the siblings also had extreme importance as well. The ending of this had a major plot twist and a lot of what happens at the end is like, whoa. Like I just remember reading the ending and being like, whoa, that's crazy. It was very unpredictable. I didn't know what was going to happen at all. I would say the last 10% of this book, I was crying because there was so much going on. There was so much emotion and you really felt it. And immediately when you start this book, you become emotionally connected to the characters, invested in them, and you want the best for them. So the last 10%, I was just sobbing. It was insane. So pretty much my only words for this book is wow. I was thoroughly impressed with this. I understand why the book is so highly rated on Goodreads now because it was incredible. Obviously, I gave this a 5-star. I had such a great time with this. I was thoroughly surprised how much I enjoyed this. I've never read The Hunger Games. I'm not a person that really reads dystopian kind of vibes like this unless it has romance in it or fantasy elements in it. So I was kind of iffy on if I was going to like this, but wow, my expectations were blown and highly would recommend you read this. Again, if this sounds like a book that's up your alley, I would give it a shot. This is going to be a duet and the second book I think is coming out next year, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe later this year, I'm not sure, but I will be reading that. And yeah, so that was The Ascended. So this next book that I'm going to talk about is not a book I ended up finishing. So the next book I attempted to read was The Buffalo Hunter, and I ended up DNFing this. This was a book that was also on my 26 for 2026, and what ended up happening was I just put a bunch of books on hold on my Libby, and they were just coming to me every week. And so this was the next book that became available for me to read, and I love a vampire book. I love a book with emotional depth. I love a book that has historical elements to it. So I was really looking forward to this. My first error was that I have tried to read a book from this author before, and I also DNF'd that book, but I just didn't make the connection that this was the same author. So that was the first flaw in my choosing. I think the number one thing for me was that I just kind of felt really lost. Like, I think I only read like the first 30 pages of the book or something like that. I just felt very lost. It felt like just a one big ramble of a book. I just felt like the characters were just kind of rambling on and on about like things that I just couldn't connect. Like, I couldn't connect what they were talking about to like the history elements of this book and what was going on with the Native Americans and the colonization, and just I don't know. I was just kind of lost what was going on, and I didn't feel invested enough to like try to understand what was going on, if that makes sense. I mean, there's not really much for me to talk about because I didn't really read that much of the book. I think if you appreciate a book with a lot of history and a plot that's rich with history, you might like this a lot more. I've heard a lot of people say that you have to push through the book, like the first half of the book, and like it really picks up and it gets really good. But there was not anything in me to motivate me to do that. Unfortunately, this just didn't click with me. So yeah, I just think it wasn't intriguing enough. I felt like it was just a lot of rambling going on. I wasn't connecting to anything. I didn't understand what was going on. It was very hard for me to get into it. And yeah, there was nothing motivating me to keep reading it, especially when I had so many other books that I wanted to read instead. So I ended up DNFing, which I should have known that I wasn't going to like it. I should have put the dots together, but this was the other book that I read from him was such a random book that I just picked up. So, yeah. But it's fine. It's okay. Maybe like read the blurb and see if it's something you would want to read. But it just wasn't for me, unfortunately. So after that DNF, the next book that became available to me on Libby was We Who Will Die. And this was also a book on my 26 for 2026 because I just tried to pick books on that list to kind of just like get through them. And I felt like I wasn't really reading books on that list that much. So I was like, maybe this month I should focus on that. So yeah, I was really excited to read this. So let's get into it. I'm going to preface this by saying the last thing I expected was for this to be like the last book I read. This pretty much was the same vibe of The Ascended, just a little bit different. So pretty much this book is about Arvel, and she has two younger brothers that she looks after. And she has this power and she has this like strength about her, and she had competed in a previous trial before and survived it. And so now she's kind of like a winner from that trial that's trying to survive. And her brother, one of her younger brothers has this lung condition, I think, where he has like trouble breathing, and she specifically needs these tonics for him to help him survive. And there's no cure for him because they don't have enough money to go north to fix him and for him to see a doctor. They don't really have education, that kind of thing. There's this vampire that steals all the tonics from her village, and the vampire shows up to her house on her doorstep and tells her, you need to re-enter in these trials and do me a favor. And so what she is set out to do for him is that she needs to kill the emperor. I don't know if he's like a king or not, but the guy who runs everything, he needs to kill him for this vampire and whatever he's going through. And he promises her protection over her brothers. He will take them north and someone will look after them and someone will heal the brothers and they will get education while she's gone. And then if she succeeds and she kills the emperor, she will live happily. She will go to the north. No one will bother her. That's all he needs her to do. And she debates doing this. She's like, this is not a great idea, but I kind of have to. And so her mentor from the last trial that she was in was her friend's father. And her friend ends up passing away from the first trial. So the father was angry with her because of what happened in that situation. But she tells him, like, look, I got to go back into these trials. I need you as my mentor. And so he comes and he helps her. And they go through these trials again. And she has to survive. And she meets these other vampires. And she also has this kind of backstory with this younger kid that she knew from childhood that kind of ran away from her. But then, kind of spoiler, but not really, he ends up being one of the vampires that she ends up re-meeting at the trial. So she reconnects with him at the trial and she's like, where have you been? I missed you. Like, we had this thing when we were younger and then you just left me. So there's that. And then he ends up helping her go through the trial. So those are the vibes. So we have some vampires going on. We have the trials going on. You must kill the emperor guy. So there we go. One thing I noticed with this book is how quickly I became invested in the characters. The author writes it in a way that you become invested in not only Arvel, but her brothers. You become invested in the father that's mentoring her. You also become invested with her story with Tiernan and how she adjusts to learning about his new life and what he develops into. You become so invested in the characters right away, like within the first couple chapters, which is great. One of the things I really liked about the book is Arvel's journey with figuring out the truth and finding out what's going on politically, but also what's going on within the society. And I like that Arvel is not at the center of it. Like, she's just kind of an aftermath of what's going on. She kind of ends up being a chess piece that people are using and manipulating and moving around to help others succeed in their motivations and what they want to get out of all of this. Like, I did kind of like that. I feel like a lot of the times it's like the main character ends up being the center of it and everything relies on her and her getting her power, and she has the ultimate power in all this, and she dictates what happens politically and what's going on. But she was just kind of there. Like, she was going through her story and she was trying to figure out what's going on like the rest of us, and not everything was on her shoulders, which I think that was a great twist to the story, and I felt like it was a nice way to incorporate her into the story without her being so important. I feel like with stories like this where they have this plot with the main character learning about her powers and she goes through these trials, the powers that this person ends up having or developing or learning about has major importance politically with the story. But in this, Arvel's powers have nothing to do with what's going on with the emperor, what's going on with the brothers or whatever. That was a nice add-on. I also felt like the story had a lot of topics of grief, anger, determination, loyalty, addiction, family, trust. Like, there were so many things that this story talks about. I felt like they all served a purpose in the plot. They weren't just add-ons to make the characters seem more interesting. Like, they genuinely felt like they were adding things to her and to the characters. Like their mother, who was suffering with addiction, I think a lot of her motivations and a lot of her anger and her emotional state, and also the state that she ends up being after the trials of them like not having money and them not having education and they couldn't move away for a better life, a lot of that happened because of their mother's addiction. So I felt like a lot of the things that were talked about in terms of like the family, the anger, the loyalty, the determination, the grief, a lot of it added a lot of character depth, and it just felt like there were the right motivations and the right things to talk about and insert into this whole mix. So I think that was really well done. I think something that fell flat for me was a lot of the things in this were predictable. Like, a lot of the major plot points that were supposed to be like big gasp, oh my God, didn't see that coming. They were just kind of like, obviously, like the whole thing with Tiernan being the same guy from her childhood, that was very obvious. Like, I thought that was a very obvious thing, but she didn't connect it till later. And then the whole thing with like, because Tiernan has a brother named Rorik, there's a whole thing with him, and I was like, this is kind of obvious, like, you know? So I don't think a lot of this story was like shocking necessarily, because it was very predictable. And also I feel like the general idea of the story, again, I've just described this plot to you like 20 times. I just read a book before this. I read The Ascended and then I read this. It's the same plot. Nothing crazy. I mean, there's like little elements that are different, like I was talking about, but it's nothing surprising. It's the same books over and over again. I was surprised though how entertained I was by this book. I feel like, again, because I've read so many of the same versions of this kind of book, I get a little bored, but this book was very entertaining and I felt like I was intrigued to see what happens, which is good. There was a lot of tension between her and Tiernan, but also with his brother Rorik, and they kind of end up being like in a love triangle kind of thing. We get like little hints here and there that there's more to Rorik and Arvel's story that we don't know about. I'm very intrigued to read about in the next book, and I'm hoping we get more into that, because I did really like Rorik and I felt like he was kind of growing on me, and I feel like there's a lot we don't know about him still. I love Tiernan so much. Like, there's always that thing where it's like in a love triangle, there's the guy that she falls for first and you may not really love him so much, and then there's the second option that she meets later that like we like her more with the bad boy dangerous guy. But in this, I like her more with Tiernan. I feel like I like Rorik as a character and I think he adds a lot of drama, but I love the moments of them when they were kids and them like learning to trust each other. And I just love Tiernan and Arvel's story so much, and I love Tiernan as a character. So yeah, I'm rooting for them, but I'm also intrigued to see what's going on with Rorik. So I was really close to giving this a 5-star because I did have a really great time with this, But because the plot was not really anything new to me and there was a lot of things that were predictable, I just felt like I had to give it a 4 star, so I gave it a 4. But don't let the rating fool you. I still would highly recommend this. If you like vampires and you like the trial situation and you love a love triangle and you like that kind of thing, highly would recommend. This is a book also that you become emotionally invested really quickly. So if you're looking for a book like that, I would highly recommend this one. And this was one of those books where I was kind of cautious of getting into because I think this is a book that's really popular on TikTok, or a lot of people were talking about it. So those books I'm kind of always iffy on if I'm going to like them or not, but I did really like this. So don't let the 4 star ruin anything. I would still recommend this. I don't necessarily think it's anything crazy or like new, but there are elements in there that are kind of fun. So yeah, that was We Who Will Die. So the last book I'm going to talk about, and the last book that I ended up reading for the month of July, is A Dowry of Blood. And that's such a hard word to say. Dowry. A Dowry of Blood. Hopefully I'm saying that right. So this is kind of like a Dracula retelling. It's a very short book. It's like 200 something pages. The main vampire doesn't really have a name. Like, she never names him, but I'm assuming it's implied that he is Dracula, or he is like some version of a very powerful vampire. We're in the point of view of one of his victims, if you will. He turns a woman into a vampire because she was about to die. So we kind of just go through her journey of her becoming a vampire, her falling in love with the vampire and her person. I don't know if it's like a sire or an heir or whatever it is, whatever you would call that. We also see her trying to come to terms with his power that he has over her and kind of the decisions that he makes throughout the story. This book has very gothic vibes, lots of gothic, lots of vampire. It's a little gory because there's a lot of like blood mention and like bodily stuff, so I would be a little wary of that. But yeah, I think this was a great book to read maybe in the spooky season or maybe in fall, but it was still really good book to read. This is another example of where the writing style matches the plot and kind of the vibe and the aura of the book. The writing style felt very gothic, very for the time that it was describing. I think it really enhanced the feeling, the tone, the setting. It added a lot of emotion as well to the story, so I did really love the writing style, and it was also easy to understand and read. I liked that this book was shorter. I felt like we got really like the important chunks of her story and like the important things that we need to know. And you kind of get like snippets of her relationship with the vampire. She slowly comes to terms with the fact that he's not all that he seems, and maybe she shouldn't trust him, or maybe he only cares about himself, like that kind of thing. I really did like the pacing as well in this. So even though the story was shorter and I appreciated that it was a little shorter, there also wasn't enough for me to feel like I was connected to the characters. We don't really get a lot of detailed background about each one. So he ends up turning other characters and they also become part of the story, but we don't get enough about each character to feel totally invested in them. I think the plot was really interesting in terms of what ends up developing, especially when the other two characters come into the mix and then we kind of get a group of people that are turned and the main vampire has to juggle between all these people that he's in charge of. I think the plot was really interesting in terms of that. So yeah, I think this was a great story. I think this is more of like a palate cleanser maybe, or if you're in a reading slump, maybe this is a book you would pick up to get into it again. People really loved this. Like, people were rating this 5 stars and thinking like this was ahead of its time and it was a crazy book. I just didn't get that feeling from this. It just felt like a good story. Like, it just felt like a good story. It had all the gothic, haunted, Dracula, vampire elements that it needed. If you're into that, maybe pick it up. Really invest much into this because it's a shorter book, but I think it was entertaining and it was a nice book to read. I ended up giving it a 3 star. So it was a good book and I don't regret reading it. But yeah, so those were all the books that I read in the month of July. Again, we had some good ones. We had a great one, and we had some that maybe didn't meet my expectations, which is totally fine. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you have any opinions about them. Let me know if you would recommend me any books. I'm always up for book recommendations. I feel like I'm at this point now where I've read over 200 books in my time, so it's getting a little bit more difficult to try and find books that I'm into or maybe want to try. But yeah, those are the books I read. And oh, I almost forgot. Last month I forgot to do this. My book of the month. I'm trying to do this thing where when I do these recaps, I also mention what my book of the month was. And of course, my book of the month was The Ascended for this month. It was incredible. It was my 5 star of the month. It was so good. I still think about it and I'm really excited to read the second book. Yeah. So that was my book of the month and that was my July reads. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.